everyone, and thanks for joining me. I'm Cindy Compert. I was your keynote earlier if you got here for the start of the session, and I talked about AI and how AI is changing the face of how we approach cybersecurity, much like analytics and AI changed the face of big data and computing. You know, I'd say 10 years ago, like security is kind of a laggard when it comes to applying AI, but that's okay, you know, we're getting there. So what I'm going to do in the next 45 minutes is talk about a different topic, which is cyber resilience. So shifting the way we think about cybersecurity from just defense to resilience, and what does that mean, and how do we chart a new course? And when we think about the public sector and all the vital services you all provide, being resilient is really more critical than ever. I mean, if you think about a worst case scenario, and I'll use a city as an example, think about all, you know, if there were a cyber terrorism event, think about how interconnected we are and all the ways that a cyber terrorist could impact a city or municipality, breaking into the water system and stopping the water, or, you know, controlling dams, which we've already seen happening, getting into the electrical grid and shutting off electricity, messing with traffic lights, messing with communication systems. You know, we could go on, but if there were a cyber terrorism event that were well coordinated against all those different attack methods and vectors, that's a scary thing. But what is scarier to me and keeps me up at night is how quickly we could recover from an event like that. And how prepared are we to recover from a set of devastating events like that? Now, if we bring it down a level to, you know, the systems that you're all responsible for, it's equally concerning is how do we become more resilient? And that's exactly what I'm going to talk about today is, first of all, making this shift and understanding why is cyber resilience now more important than ever. Also, what is cyber resilience? What do we mean by that term? I'm going to share with you the Ponemon and IBM cyber-resiliency study that we did a few months ago. It had some very interesting insights that we gained out of it on, you know, what is the state of resiliency preparedness and what are the top performers doing that everyone else isn't doing. So I'll share some of those learnings, and then we'll wrap up with steps that you can take and how you can improve your own cyber resiliency. So let's talk about challenges. Now, that is not me. I do like to go off-roading, but that's a little bit too muddy for me. But besides being stuck in the mud and having no idea where you are and being unable to see the trail ahead, even if there is one, you know, this is a lot about what we face in the world of cybersecurity. You know, we have the skills gaps, too many alerts, not enough visibility into critical events, so we can't see the road ahead. For resiliency, a lot of it is undefined incident response processes and communications. You know, how do we communicate when there is an event? Who's responsible? Then we have this very confusing regulatory landscape, and even more so with California just passing the Consumer Privacy Protection Act. That I think that will have some very interesting impacts on us. We also see level of attacks, and then a lot of tools that don't play well together. And the real devastation is not only the potential safety impacts, but also, you know, what happens in recovering, and nobody wants to be front page news for sure. So let's define what we mean by cyber resilience. It's an organization's ability to maintain its core purpose and integrity in the face of cyber attacks. It's what we used to think of as DR, disaster recovery. So really, what we've seen in the last year is that disaster recovery and high availability are really needing to merge with cybersecurity, and that's going to call for a lot more collaboration. So if botnet takes over your machine, or a crypto mining machine, crypto mining takes over a server so that it's pegging the server at 100%, how are you going to detect that, and how are you going to recover and get back and up and running again? So I'm going to now share with you some of the key findings that surfaced in this study that we did. Again, it was with the Ponemon Institute. We do a lot of research with them. They're very famous for the cost of a data breach study. This is a separate study in particular on cyber resiliency. So the first thing we saw, this is the good news, and the question was, how has your organization's cyber resilience changed in the last 12 months? And what we saw is a 72% year-over-year improvement. That's great. And this, by the way, is the third year in a row we've done this study. So we're doing it each year, and we're starting to pick up trends. But I want to know, who's the 4% who declined? What happened there? So, we're seeing improvement. So that is a good thing. And even if you look at the bar of no improvement, year to year, the 2017 was 25% no improvement, and the year before, 44%. So really, the industry is maturing, and I think it's because once you have mastered however you're doing security operations, whether you have a security operations center or you're able to detect and respond to threats, you quickly realize you better start looking at shoring up your incident response plans and your recovery. So an incident response doesn't necessarily mean resiliency. It could mean just responding to an incident, but not necessarily how fast you recover. So you really need to think about from what we call the boom to the right of the boom. And we've seen this as well. We have what we call a cyber range in our Cambridge, Massachusetts security headquarters. So IBM is headquartered in New York, but our security organization is headquartered in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we have what's called this cyber range, and it is an operations center. And you go in and you experience what it's like to be under attack, under a cyber attack. It's extremely realistic. And having gone through it myself, what I noticed is my physical response when we started getting on the boards, attack is happening and the news is outside the door, and then phones start ringing and there's people on the phone wanting to know from the press, what's going on with the attack and all this stuff. And literally your heart is pounding, like you're really feeling like you're under attack. So what we've seen is that in putting, well over 1,400 clients through the cyber range exercise, and this is something that's at no cost. We bring in clients from all over the world. And what we've seen though is many of them are just flat out unprepared. After the event, a lot of them, even if they have cyber resiliency or incident response plans, they haven't tested them enough to know where their challenges are, and especially in coordinating resources. So back to the Ponemon study. So the next question was, why did your organization's cyber resilience improve? And the respondents were given, you could provide up to 4 choices. So the first was saying hiring skilled personnel. Well, I mean, that is a given. If you hire good people, you are going to improve. The next one that I think is very interesting is improved information governance practices, and as well as the third one, which is visibility into applications and data assets. And I think this is a piece in cybersecurity that a lot of organizations are missing, is you can't be resilient if you don't know where your most critical assets and applications are, and you don't have effective practices for protecting them and managing them. So to me, this is really a foundation, is identifying what is most critical, what has the most value and most risk, classifying that, going and finding it, and typically using automated tools, and then identifying what controls you're going to put in place based on the risk and value of those assets. And we call that a critical data protection program. That, to me, is a foundational activity of a mature cybersecurity program that a lot of clients haven't gotten to yet, or they may not be aware, but it is absolutely so critical. Because let's face it, are you going to spend all your time getting your archive systems up and running first, or are you going to look at your mission critical systems and get those up and running? Where are you going to have dual hardware, or parallel system, or more detailed backup plans? You're going to work on critical systems first. So the next question was, what describes your organization's cybersecurity incident response plan? And we call that a CSIRP. So, 3/4 have inconsistent, informal, or non-existent plans. That is huge. And I got to tell you, a lot of times when I meet with a client, they may not necessarily want to share, what's not working. And, it may take a while to have more of a discussion and talk about what other clients have been doing. But what I see is most of the time, it's not applied consistently across the enterprise. It's very narrowly focused. So my advice to you is when you start developing your plans, think about who are your stakeholders. Well, the stakeholders will be identified based on your critical assets, your critical systems, your critical applications. Those are the folks that you're going to need to work with, at least for starters. Well, what are the biggest barriers to cyber resilience? So there were 3. And again, I think some of these are red herrings. Some of these are almost, I don't know, they're kind of not excuses, but, okay, we don't have enough people. No one has enough people. I've never gone to visit a client and they said, oh, we have plenty of cybersecurity experts, thank you very much, we don't need any more. That just doesn't happen. So the first barrier that was identified was a lack of investment in new cybersecurity technologies, including AI and machine learning. Now, granted, that is a force multiplier, it can help you, but it is not a barrier to cyber resilience. It's about being able to recover systems quickly. So yes, tools can help you gain visibility, but they're not going to solve that problem. As I mentioned, hiring skilled personnel, we never have enough. That's never going to change. At least I don't think so. And then finally is the lack of visibility into applications and data assets. Absolutely. And I have to say, I've heard more reasons why clients can't go find their critical assets. They're too busy, they don't have time, a variety of reasons. But in this day and age, there are a lot of tools that are out there, including cloud tools. I mean, we certainly have some tools that in minutes you can get up and running and start searching and finding where is that sensitive data, where are those critical assets. So now, that's kind of the general audience and the general state of cyber resilience. It's not so good. Most folks don't really have a plan. It's improved, but it's still not there, and we feel like we never have enough resources. So let's talk about what are the high performers doing. What are the high performers doing that everyone else isn't doing? And by high performers, when we did the study, we asked the respondents to identify their state of cyber resiliency maturity. So it is a self-ranking. So, the first thing is budget definitely helps. There's no question about it. We've seen the percentage of total cybersecurity budget spend on cyber resiliency increase over the past 3 years, and it's now running at about 30% for the top performers. So they're really allocating budget and resources to cyber resiliency specifically. So now let's take a look at what these high performers are doing. This is 28% of the respondents who believe they have a mature program of cybersecurity consistently deployed across the enterprise. So the first question was, what best describes your incident response plan. And the high performers, 53% of the time, said they have a plan consistently applied across the entire enterprise. Look at that gap. 30% is everybody, and 53% top performers. So first lesson learned, a plan that is consistently applied across the enterprise using well-defined frameworks with measurement, with metrics to define, what you're doing, how long it takes you right now, and then how can you improve that? Just like a Gantt chart in project planning, right? You want to look at your critical path and figure out, where are the things that take the longest. Maybe it's a handover to legal. Maybe it's a handover to compliance so they can figure out what regulations they may have to flag in the case of a reportable event. You'll see that in the case of high performers, very few have CSIRPs that are either ad hoc or don't have any. And I'm not sure how you can be a high performer and not have a plan. Maybe it's a little delusional. And I will say this, I have met with clients who have said to me that they have their cybersecurity completely handled. They're running the entire organization with 5 people. And I go, okay, that's great. I'd like to know what you're doing. I'm sure we can learn something. So the next question is, did your organization have a data breach or cybersecurity incident? And so these are yes, no's. So what we can see with the high performers versus everybody else is that fewer of them had incidents, 48 versus 56%, and many fewer of them had larger data breaches, 40 versus 55%. So what is this saying? It says if you have a mature program, you can actually have an impact on resiliency and on the number of breach events. I will also say, although it's not captured in this study, that the time to containment, the time to notice someone in your system for high performers is much, much shorter. What's shocking to me is that on average, an attacker is inside a system 200 days before being noticed. 200 days, that's crazy. So clearly, attackers may be in systems and doing things, and we don't even realize it. Now, if a system is taken down, ransomware, you betcha, we're going to notice pretty darn fast. So speaking of disruptions, here's the big one. So the question is, as a result of breaches or cybercrime incidents, how frequently do disruptions to business processes or IT services occur? Look at this difference, 30% versus 45%. That's a big number. So if you are challenged with getting resources from your executives, feel free to share this study. If you download the PDF, you'll see the link to the study. And this is a cost justification. Right here is reducing breaches, reducing outages. Another thing that clients do is they quantify the impact or cost of an outage per minute, per hour, per day. And that's a quantifiable number that if you take a proposal to your board of supervisors or your sponsoring executives, it's something they understand. It's something that is clear in their terms. The next, speaking of senior management, is what about senior management's awareness of the positive impact of cyber resilience on the enterprise? So between high performers and everybody else, there's definitely a recognition that cyber resilience impacts enterprise risks. So it is an enterprise risk. We also see a large gap in brand and reputation. So it's that perception. And in public sector, I think we kind of discount that. Oh, well, we're not, a profit-driven organization. Oh, well, if we lose a few customers, no big deal. Okay, well, we have a captive audience, right? Our constituents are captive unless they move. But Suppose you're doing digital transformation, you're providing new mobile apps, you want to encourage your constituents and other agencies to use these digital apps. Well, if you've had a cyber incident, guess what the chances are of them wanting to share their personal information in that manner are going to be? They're not going to want to do that. So it really does have an impact even in public sector, because your constituents will be much less willing to transact with you in a digital manner, whether that's on a mobile app or on your web portal. We also see that there is a big gap in the funding for cyber resilience between top performers and everybody else, 31 versus 57%. So there is an awareness. The top performers clearly have executive sponsorship, and the executives are willing to vote with their wallets because there's a justification for the program. We also see that high-performing companies are more likely to share threat intelligence with government and their peers. So that's something I challenge you all to think about, and we even discussed this in the CISO workshop yesterday, is how do we do a better job of sharing threat intelligence and threat information? And you can see that the high performers are sharing, 2/3 of them are sharing information versus slightly less for everyone else. And so being able to share threat information means you're going to have better visibility, because resilience is also about anticipating attacks, right? It's protecting against them. So if you know that the community down the street was just hit by a ransomware attack or a crypto mining attack, then you can prepare and anticipate and even patch your machines, whether they're servers or mobile devices or desktops, to anticipate against those kinds of events. So now that I've covered a lot of the study and some of the highlights, what I want to share with you is how you can improve your own cyber resilience and share with you some strategies and examples. And this is also, again, based on what we've learned in our cyber range exercises. And it's really interesting with the cyber range. What'll happen is typically a CISO and their team will come in and they'll do the event, they'll do the exercise, and very quickly they realize how important incident response is to the rest of the organization. And in many cases, we've had senior executives of organizations, we've had CEOs come in, heads of HR, heads of compliance, privacy, et cetera. Because again, when you talk about your cyber resiliency strategy and your incident response plan, you do really need to think about the entire picture. So how do you engage in incident response plan creation and implementation? The first thing is that different incidents require different types of plans. So what you're going to want to do is identify the most frequent types of attacks on your business. And identify, what are you doing today for those kinds of attacks? Maybe start with, a top 3 or top 5. You don't have to go crazy, but think about what would be the most devastating attack. Well, I'd say the most obvious one is what unfortunately happened to our colleagues in Atlanta, that ransomware attack. So, if there were a ransomware attack and it took out, pick your most critical systems, Department of Water and Power, maybe it was, something having to do with a crime, et cetera, or even vital benefits like, healthcare benefits. So if those systems were taken down, what do you do today? What's your plan look like? And what we found is, again, it's very critical to involve all parties, every single stakeholder, because when the news, that San Jose Mercury comes knocking at your door, hey, we heard you had a cyber attack, would you care to comment? You want to make sure you have that right communication, that it is crisp, that you maybe don't disclose too much too early, because if you don't have the facts The worst thing you can do is backtrack on things you've already said. And we have seen this publicly, many organizations who have made statements about a cyber attack that turned out to not be the case later on when more news was gathered on the situation. So you want to make sure that you have those clear lines of responsibility and ownership, and then that you practice and refine those plans frequently with fire drills, tabletop exercises, etc. And certainly it helps to engage experts to guide you on that journey because they've seen it before. They can share playbooks they've already created, and many playbooks for specific industries are very similar. Like if any of you have health and human services, anything that's under HIPAA, clearly, you've got to do your breach notification, and there's certain gating factors that need to be defined. So you want to make sure that everybody involved understands what is their role, because incident response is definitely a team sport. The next thing that's going on is there's a move to orchestration and automation. If you look at incident response, and in a couple of slides I have an example, every one of these circles is a task or an activity. And each one is dependent on the other. And if you know that one activity takes 10 hours, that's going to slow you down. So you want to identify when you respond, in this example, to a ransomware attack, how are you orchestrating? And orchestration means this. It means coordinating the people, the process, and the technology throughout the incident response process. How is everybody working together? And then you can start looking at things like smart automation. So an example could be, I see an alert coming in from my security event monitoring system. It looks like it's a problem, so I'm going to open an incident. Well, what's the next thing that's going to happen? Well, probably going to start gathering some evidence. So maybe you can go out to your log manager and pull some logs. You can automate that using APIs. Maybe you want to open a ticket in your ServiceNow, or vice versa. You may have a ticket in ServiceNow that you decide to turn into an incident. So all of this means using APIs to automate all of these interactions and interchanges, because that is really what slows you down. If you have 5 manual systems that don't talk to each other, how can you expect to respond to an incident quickly? You can't. So it really takes a very studied eye to look at what are each of these tasks and how long do they currently take you, and then you can baseline what it looks like and look to tools that help you with orchestration and automation to drive down those response times so that you can respond quickly. And really, you cannot do this without having predefined playbooks that describe and guide you on what to do, who's going to do it and when, and to even track your progress and escalate when necessary. So I mentioned intelligent orchestration. Let's get into that in a little bit more detail and what that really means. It's really about facilitating and speeding up incident management, collaboration, and team management. And there's really 3 aspects. So the first is the orchestration and automation. And this is the idea of having dynamic playbooks that guide you on what to do and when. And they'll change based on the activity. Having scripting, a rules engine, and then those integrations I talked about. So being able to integrate to virtually anything, whether that's emails, again, it could be trouble ticketing, it could be a back-end data activity monitoring system where you can pull an audit report and add that as evidence. You also want to be able to enrich incidents and automate that, so pull back to source systems and log systems to bring that information forward. The next, on the bottom left, is case management. And that is where teams are able to create, escalate, and manage incidents from one place. This could include things like team management, reporting and analytics, because when an incident happens, what's the first thing that happens if you're a responder? Your phone's ringing off the hook, and all the executives are wanting to know, what's the status, who's doing what and when? Well, if you have a dashboard and you have analytic reports for your management, they'll be able to see what's going on at a given point in time. So it's having that visibility. So and then being able to collaborate, whether that's emails or knowing who's assigned to a task, or even who is holding up a task. So if someone's taking too long, you might have an escalation path. Maybe someone's out of the office and they're not responding. So having those escalation paths can help you. And then again, as I mentioned, having metrics and key performance indicators so that you can identify how well you're doing and then show your management how you're improving. You will also want to do simulations. So being able to have a simulation environment where you can practice and refine these playbooks, because again, they're living, breathing things. So let's look at an example. This is a real example from a healthcare client. So they're very highly regulated, and I like to use this one because it's a very realistic one. And what they were able to measure before they implemented an incident response platform is they went from 85 minutes down to 1 minute. 85. This is not unusual. So I have a client who's a state government, and they were in the process, and this goes back about 3 years, a newly appointed CISO. He had been a CISO for state police, then he took over the entire state. They consolidated all their agencies, so they had, centrally managed cybersecurity capability, and they'd pretty much gotten a handle on security operations and managing alerts and doing their security event management and intelligence and also identity, done a pretty good job there. And I said, you really need to be looking at incident response. Like, you've got to be able to automate this because you're never going to be able to respond fast enough. And then they had some incidents where, it was pretty clear they needed to do some work. So they implemented a platform, and they were able to get it up and running in about a week, and they were able to reduce their times down from days to minutes. And I have to say, with IBM, it was the same for us. One of the reasons why we bought an incident response company, Resilient, is because our own incident response, was, around the 30-day mark, and we were able to knock it down, and this is a full-blown incident, to 3 days from 30. So we saw that, tremendous value in that, and then we decided to buy the company. In this example, it's a little bit more specific. It's not like a full-on, end-to-end incident, but it starts with escalating an event from your SIM or from, wherever you're pulling that log information and log alert, and then comparing it and checking the indicators of compromise against threat intelligent feeds. So again, we can automate that. Then we can look at historical incidents and data. That's pretty quick. Then manual enrichment, this is where we can again pull other process information, and we can take that down, from many minutes down to seconds. And then the incident tracking, the logging, and the reporting, that's an immediate thing, as opposed to previously this particular client didn't even have those processes in place. So, every client is different. Sometimes it's from multiple days down to days, sometimes it's from, hours down to minutes. But what I wanted to share is that with incident response, you have the ability to really improve and streamline and take a lot of that manual effort away so that your responders are spending time on the important incidents and doing that investigation, or being able to have the ability to look at and deploy new technologies, assistive technologies to help them. So I challenge you to consider, how do you automate your incident response? And how do you automate your resiliency as part of that process? So, you want to practice worst case scenarios. You're probably wondering, where is this place? This is Imperial Sand Dunes in way southeastern California. It's right near the Mexican border. It is 6 miles long, wide by 40 miles long. And last year over the holidays, we rented an RV and we rented an off-road vehicle. You saw the mud-covered utility vehicle. It's pretty much like that, but there's no mud, it's all sand. And you go out there, and these sand dunes are hundreds of feet high. Hundreds of feet high. And the only way you can navigate them is by practicing, because guess what? We got stuck within the first few hours, and we had to have some folks pull us out. So what you'll see here is you literally practice going in circles to make sure that you can navigate these dunes. And the thing you don't want to do is, you see the backside of those dunes, they're all pristine. You don't want to go there because you're going to get stuck. So that's the same way with incident response, is you want to think about, if you got stuck, what would you do? In our case, we made sure that we had supplies, we had water, we had backup plans. So it's the same with incident response. Think about what are your backup plans going to be? And then keep practicing, because you really don't want to be this truck that's, stuck and burned up, and it's not a pretty picture. In our case, our backup plan was, see where those trees are? That's where all the camped RVs are, so we knew we could walk out. Like if we really got stuck, we were okay, because I refused to go out in the big dunes that were, we would have had to walk like 10 hours to get back. So, my risk tolerance was a lot lower than my partner's. He decided he wanted to go out there and have some fun, but that wasn't my kind of fun. So also think about your risk tolerance and what you are willing to manage and tolerate. And, that's really the foundation of resiliency and incident response. So what we've learned in this field, and for us it's been about a 3-year journey, is that incident response is definitely a team sport, and you don't want to underestimate the impact or who needs to be involved. And again, imagine that well-coordinated attack that I talked about that takes out your communication, attacks traffic signals, takes out water, takes out power. How would you coordinate with emergency services? And probably the most practical advice that I received was something so simple. Suppose all your phone systems are taken down. You have an incident response plan. Show of hands, how many of you have your organization's bridge emergency phone number in a card in your purse or wallet that you can get on a phone? One person, 2, okay. 3, and one of them works for the government, so you're a pro. Okay, so 3 people in this room. So the first lesson learned is get that bridge number, make sure everybody knows it, and if something happens, you immediately have communication. Have that backup plan. Also measure your level of visibility of what you have today and how you're doing it, and look to improve on it. However you do that, whether you use a tool or don't, there are many ways you can improve your coordination. And you really want to focus on your analyst productivity and how long it takes them to complete these tasks. And we are seeing automation, and now AI is increasingly going to play a role, because some of the things that we're working on is using AI to drive dynamic playbooks and dynamic guidance. So not only, hey, here's a problem, here's how we can automate, but here's how other clients in your industry have responded to this event, and here's what you could potentially do to improve on it. And I'm very intrigued by that idea of learning in a protected fashion, anonymizing that information, but learning from it. And certainly even Watson for cybersecurity, we take a lot of the events we manage, monitor billions of events a month. All that information is anonymized and feeds into our threat analysis. So we believe the same can be true for resiliency and incident response, being able to learn from what others are doing well. So with that, I hope I've left you with some ideas for your consideration and some ways that you can potentially improve your own organization's resiliency. So feel free, we've got 4 minutes for questions, or if you'd like to speak to me on the side, I welcome your interactions. So with that, thank you, and any questions you have.
Do you have a go-to for improving analyst productivity right away?
A go-to for improving analyst productivity right away? Is that the...
Automation?
Oh, automation. I would say that automation, number one, but also looking at how you can use these guided advisors. So, like with when we talk about an incident, right, first thing is figuring out, do you have an incident? So, I'd say like user behavior analytics is almost a no-brainer, like to figure out something is happening. But then the next is, how do you gather your evidence today? So if you do have an incident, you need to preserve evidence, or you want to gather evidence, how do you do that today? Who's involved? How long does it take for them to run an audit report? Right? If it takes them 2 days, that's not a good thing. If you have automation where you can feed it a bunch of parameters on a portal and say, I want this audit report for this user for this time frame against this server, and you're able to do that even with an API and pass it along, that's going to be huge. So for every organization, it's different, and a lot of it is really sitting down and doing that analysis work. Your subject matter experts will know where the bottlenecks are. Learn from what's not worked for you already. That's probably the best advice I have, is learn from what's not worked for you. Yes?
So, to that point, whenever I go to our operations and say, I need audit reports, they say, well, we can only turn the logs on for this much time, and cannot, because otherwise it's just going to eat up a lot of space. And so they shut down, only if needed, they'll do logs. So is that a typical environment? Because you can, as sessions come in, you can have a huge amount of logs running around.
You can.
So you need that for incident, for this to work, right?
You do. And so if we go back to the discussion this morning, security is a big data problem. Right. There is no excuse for not having logs turned on. There are many very low impact technologies that do not sit in line. Example, if you're using native database auditing, it's going to kill your performance. There's plenty of tools on the market that are very low impact, low single digit impact, and you can take that audit information and put it off to a big data cloud environment where you're not having to do all that management work. So when I get that, I usually go, okay, show me what you're doing. Let's figure out a way to get what you do need. Not saying you have to collect everything. That's kind of crazy and expensive, but let's look at where you don't have visibility that you absolutely need it, and figure out a way to engineer a solution that works for everybody. So, I'd say, in a nice way, say, hey, you mind sharing with me what you're doing today? Let's take a look at that, and let's see if we can figure out something that's a little less impactful that's going to work for us all. Because, if that's a major system, and it's impacted, and it's going to take 5 days to recover because you didn't have any visibility, what was that impact? And normally you can go to an executive and say, hey, I have this issue, would you support me? And they're going to go, yeah, I'll support you. So, great question, great comment. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.